The air in the boardroom was cold, sharp with tension. 20 executives sat in silence as Marcus Wexler, the kind of billionaire whose name opened doors and closed careers, stood at the head of the table with fire in his eyes. Olivia Hart stood across from him, her chest tight, her palms damp. She was 32, brilliant, and up until now, one of the youngest female VPs the company had ever promoted. But in Wexler Global, talent meant nothing when ego was threatened. "You failed," Marcus hissed, waving a report in his hand like a weapon. "You embarrassed this company." The accusation wasn't true. The failed deal had been sabotaged by a senior executive trying to protect his own skin. But Marcus didn't care about truth. He cared about dominance, and today Olivia was the chosen sacrifice. She opened her mouth to speak, but he raised his hand sharply. "You're done here. Get out." There were gasps around the table, no due process, no chance to defend herself. Just a public firing, cruel, deliberate, and final. She walked out with her dignity barely intact, and as the elevator doors closed behind her, she whispered to herself, "You'll remember this day, Marcus. One day, you'll remember." In the weeks that followed, Olivia vanished from the corporate radar. No press release, no LinkedIn update, nothing. Friends reached out, unsure of what to say, offering sympathy wrapped in awkward silences. But Olivia didn't want sympathy. What she wanted was clarity. She rented a cheap studio apartment far from the skyline of Wexler Tower and turned inward. Every day, she dissected the company's operations in her memory. Every meeting, every number, every whisper she'd overheard in executive lounges. She read obsessively, slept little, and began mapping out the weaknesses she'd once ignored. The betrayal had burned her pride to ash, but beneath it, something else ignited: precision. She realized that while Marcus had money and power, he lacked something she had in abundance: vision. Olivia began drafting a business model, one that didn't just compete with Wexler Global, but slowly siphoned away its core clients. She reached out to former colleagues who had left the company disillusioned. Quietly, methodically, she laid the foundation for a comeback, not as an employee, as a rival. 2 years passed in near silence. While the media continued to spotlight Marcus Wexler's lavish acquisitions and aggressive market takeovers, no one paid attention to a small, privately funded startup emerging in the renewable logistics sector. It was called Ardent. No loud marketing campaigns, no press interviews, just results. What the world didn't know was that Ardent was Olivia's brainchild. She'd poured everything she had into it, not just her savings, but her late mother's inheritance, a painful choice she made with trembling hands. The first months were brutal: client rejections, missed targets, sleepless nights filled with doubt. But slowly, the tide shifted. Her strategy, to offer transparent, ethical supply chain solutions with cutting-edge efficiency, began attracting attention from businesses tired of Wexler's cutthroat tactics. Her leadership style was different too: calm, inclusive, grounded in empathy but firm in expectations. She wasn't building just a company, she was building a culture, and it resonated with people. Former Wexler staff began reaching out, asking if they could join. By year 3, Ardent had secured a government contract that Wexler Global had spent months lobbying for. Marcus laughed it off, but for the first time, a name other than his began circulating in boardrooms he thought he controlled. Marcus barely remembered Olivia Hart's name by then. To him, she'd been just another casualty in a long line of dismissals, talented perhaps, but unremarkable. He continued to operate as he always had, aggressively. But beneath the glitter of his reputation, cracks began to form. Longtime partners became restless. Some pulled out without explanation. Internal morale declined, with key team members citing toxic culture as they resigned. His CFO quit without notice. And still, Marcus didn't connect the dots, until one day during a quarterly report meeting, someone mentioned a name: Ardent. The numbers were alarming. In less than 4 years, this obscure firm had carved out a significant share in Wexler Global's most profitable division. Marcus's jaw clenched. "Find out who's behind it," he ordered. When the answer came hours later that Ardent's CEO was none other than Olivia Hart, the glass he held slipped from his hand and shattered on the marble floor. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar: fear. The girl he publicly humiliated was not just surviving, she was circling. The revelation struck Marcus harder than he expected. He tried to dismiss it, calling her success a fluke, a lucky streak that would fizzle out. But when his legal team reported that several of Wexler Global's key vendors had recently signed long-term contracts with Ardent, he realized it wasn't luck. It was strategy. And it had been unfolding for years, right under his nose. Olivia had been invisible to him, and that invisibility had been her shield. She'd studied his patterns, his flaws, and had built a company that offered clients everything Wexler Global had failed to deliver: integrity, transparency, and real partnership. Investors noticed, analysts noticed. Articles began surfacing comparing Ardent's ethical approach to Wexler's aggressive reputation. And then came the headline that shook him: "Is Ardent the future and Wexler the past?" Marcus flew into a rage. He demanded an acquisition offer be made to Ardent, confident she would take the money. Everyone had a price. He offered her $150 million. Olivia didn't even respond, not a word. That silence wounded him more than rejection. It was the reminder that he was no longer in control of her narrative. Olivia's silence was intentional. She knew Marcus would try to buy her out. That's what men like him did when they couldn't outmaneuver someone. They wrote a check. But her vision had never been for sale. She wasn't just out to win. She wanted to shift the way business was done, to create something that couldn't be corrupted by ego or greed. Meanwhile, inside Wexler Global, the rot Marcus had ignored was beginning to bloom. Anonymous whistleblower reports were filed. A small scandal involving offshore funds leaked to the press. Share prices wavered, and then came the shareholder revolt. Marcus, once untouchable, was now under scrutiny. The board demanded answers. They wanted solutions. Instead, he gave them rage, denial, and threats. The same tools he'd always used. But they no longer worked. Behind closed doors, the board began speaking with other firms, exploring mergers and exits. One name kept coming up: Ardent. Olivia hadn't just built a competitor, she'd built a replacement. And soon, Wexler Global would need her more than she ever needed them. The formal offer came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Olivia sat at her desk, surrounded by quiet natural light in Ardent's modest but modern headquarters. A stark contrast to the cold, polished opulence of Wexler Tower. Her legal team laid out the terms. Wexler Global's board, desperate to prevent collapse, was willing to sell. Not a merger, a sale, 100% acquisition. The irony struck hard. Just 5 years earlier, she had walked out of that company humiliated and discarded. Now they were on their knees, hoping she would rescue what they had mismanaged. She walked to the window, watching the soft streaks of rain blur the skyline. "Yes," she said softly but firmly. "We'll acquire them. But under our terms." And so it began, a meticulous, unsentimental process. She didn't seek revenge. She didn't change the name or fire half the staff. Instead, she installed a new culture, restructured leadership, and issued policies that protected innovation and employee well-being, the very things Wexler had destroyed. Marcus was stripped of power, his shares dissolved in exchange for silence. He didn't get a seat at the table. He didn't even get a photo on the new website. The press erupted when the news broke. Former Wexler executive now owns the company that fired her. Headlines praised Olivia as a visionary, an icon of resilience and strategy. But the moment the cameras turned off, she didn't celebrate with champagne. She returned to her office alone and opened an old folder, her termination letter, crumpled and yellowed with age. She read it one last time, then fed it through the shredder, smiling softly. It wasn't vindication she felt. It was closure. Outside, the media clamored to get a statement from Marcus Wexler, but he refused every interview. He was rarely seen again in public. Rumors said he'd retreated to a villa overseas, bitter and bewildered, unable to process how someone he once dismissed so easily had become the very person to unseat him. Olivia, on the other hand, used her newfound influence to fund scholarships for women in business, support sustainable ventures, and mentor young professionals, not to prove anything, but because she knew what it meant to have no one open a door for you. She didn't want admiration, she wanted impact, and quietly she became the kind of leader she once dreamed of working for. Months after the acquisition, Olivia was invited to speak at a global leadership summit in Geneva, a stage once reserved for CEOs like Marcus Wexler. She hesitated at first. Public attention had never been her goal. But when she stood at the podium, facing a sea of executives, journalists, and aspiring entrepreneurs, she understood the power of her story. She didn't speak about revenge or humiliation. She spoke about dignity, resilience, and the danger of mistaking cruelty for strength. "I was told that I didn't belong in a room like this," she said, her voice steady, "and for a long time I believed it. But now I know. Exclusion is not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of someone else's fear." Her words rippled through the crowd, not because they were grand, but because they were honest. After the talk, dozens of young women approached her, some in tears, thanking her for showing what quiet power looks like. Olivia realized that her story had become bigger than the pain that started it. It was no longer about a man who had tried to destroy her. It was about every person who had ever been told they weren't enough, and what could happen when they refused to believe it. Meanwhile, inside the remnants of the old Wexler empire, now under Ardent's banner, a transformation took place. Employees who had once tiptoed around Marcus's wrath began to rediscover creativity. The air in the office changed, less sterile, more human. Olivia implemented programs that encouraged collaboration and empathy. A department once focused solely on profit margins now hosted monthly innovation labs where junior employees pitched ideas directly to executives. The company, once synonymous with fear, was slowly becoming a symbol of balance, proof that business could thrive without dehumanizing its people. Even clients noticed. Former partners who had left returned, not for better pricing, but for the culture shift. Ardent's value was no longer just in services rendered, it was in the trust it restored. And through it all, Olivia remained quietly at the helm, never loud, never cruel. She didn't need to remind the world of what she had endured. Her work did that for her. Each policy signed, each promotion given, each risk taken, all of it whispered the same truth. You can rise without stepping on anyone. You can lead without wounding. You can win and still remain kind. Olivia's rise caught the attention of the very institutions that once overlooked her. Prestigious universities requested her as a guest lecturer. Award committees flooded her inbox. Magazine covers offered lucrative deals, but she accepted sparingly, always cautious of becoming the kind of leader she once feared. Distant, self-congratulatory, unreachable. She kept her inner circle tight and her focus sharp. One afternoon, during a quarterly team meeting, a new intern nervously raised a hand. "How did you stay strong when everything was falling apart?" Olivia paused. Her eyes softened. "I didn't," she replied. "I broke. But I broke inward, quietly. And then I rebuilt. Not to prove anything to anyone, but because I needed to know who I was, without the title, the office, the power. Once you know that, no one can take it from you again. The room was silent, absorbing her words. In that moment, Olivia gave them something far greater than corporate knowledge. She gave them permission to fall, to heal, to rise with purpose. Far away from the spotlight, Marcus Wexler lived in quiet exile. The man who once commanded boardrooms now struggled to fill silence. He read the articles about Olivia, sometimes with disdain, other times with a strange admiration he couldn't admit, but mostly he wrestled with shame. Not because he lost his company, but because he finally understood the weight of what he had done to her, and countless others. In the emptiness of his solitude, he replayed that day in the boardroom over and over again. He had thought it was power, but now he saw it for what it was, fear disguised as control. One night, he penned a letter, a sincere, handwritten apology, not to erase the past, but to acknowledge it. He never knew if Olivia read it, but he hoped she did. Not for redemption, but because he needed her to know. She had won, not just the company, but the higher ground. Years passed. Ardent expanded globally, becoming a model for ethical enterprise. Other corporations began to mirror its practices, recognizing that Olivia hadn't just disrupted an industry, she had redefined it. Her story was taught in business schools, not just as a case study in leadership, but as a lesson in moral courage. And still, Olivia remained grounded. She volunteered in schools. She visited women's shelters. She mentored single mothers trying to re-enter the workforce. Her power came not from the empire she built, but from the values that fueled it. One afternoon, walking through the same lobby where she had once been escorted out in shame, now renamed the Heart Innovation Center, Olivia paused. A young woman at reception looked up and smiled. "You're the reason I applied here," she said. Olivia smiled back. "Then I hope you'll stay long enough to be the reason someone else does." It was during Ardent's 10th anniversary gala, held in a renovated historic theatre with employees from all over the world, that Olivia gave what many would later call the most powerful speech of her life. She stood alone on stage, a single spotlight following her, dressed not in diamonds or designer gowns, but in a simple navy suit. "A decade ago, I walked out of a building where I thought my story ended," she said. "But that ending was only the beginning of something truer. I learned that sometimes the fall is the blessing, that silence can be strategy, that grace, not anger, is the most powerful response." The audience stood in ovation before she even finished. That night, a mural was unveiled behind the main stage, a timeline of Ardent's journey. At the center, not a portrait of Olivia, but a quote from her mother. "Do not let their cruelty change your goodness. Let it deepen your roots." And it had. In the quiet of her office after the gala, Olivia sat alone, a glass of water in hand, staring out at the skyline that once seemed so unreachable. The city hadn't changed, but she had. She no longer needed to prove her worth to the towers that once loomed over her. She had built her own. The real triumph wasn't the acquisition or the accolades or the applause. It was that she had done it without becoming what tried to destroy her. No bitterness, no vengeance. Just vision and relentless, quiet strength. She opened her drawer, pulled out a small, worn notebook, the one she'd filled with her first business plans after her firing, and placed it in a wooden box beside her mother's ring. A chapter had closed. Another was beginning. If Olivia's story moved you, share it. Leave a comment below saying, "Real power is quiet." And remember, sometimes the greatest comeback is becoming the person they never imagined you could be.